To determine why so many of us are disappointed with The Last Jedi, I decided to revisit the series as a whole, reread some books, and watch some videos I hadn't seen in years. Star Wars, as we all know, is based off the monomyth or the hero's journey, but it broke the mold when it came to applying the monomyth to film. That's arguably why the series has resonated with so many people, specifically in the Western world. But why? What's the attraction? Why does it matter? What makes a silly fictional movie important to millions of people? Why is it more than a movie to these fans? What makes it important? Why do they feel that sense of ownership? Well, let's take a look at the function of mythology from Joseph Campbell.
Why myths? Why should we care about myths? What do they have to do with my life?
Well, my first answer would be, well, go on, live your life. It's a good life. You don't need this. I don't believe in being interested in subjects because they're said to be important and interesting. I believe in being caught by it somehow or other. But you may find that with a proper introduction, this subject will catch you. And so what can it do for you when it does catch you? These bits of information from ancient times, which have to do with the themes that have supported man's life, built civilizations, informed religions over the millennia, have to do with deep inner problems, inner mysteries, inner thresholds of passage. And if you don't know what the guide signs are along the way, you have to work it out yourself.
Do you, when you look at something like Star Wars, recognize some of the themes of the hero throughout mythology?
Well, I think that George Lucas was using standard mythological figures. The old man as the advisor, well, specifically, what he made me think of is the Japanese sword master.
Remember, a Jedi can feel the Force flowing through him.
I've known some of those people, and this man has a bit their character.
Well, there's something mythological, too, isn't there, in the sense that the hero is helped by this stranger who shows up and gives him some instrument, a sword or a sheaf of light, shaft of light.
He gives him not only a physical instrument, but a psychological commitment and a psychological center.
This time, let go your conscious self.
When I took our two sons to see it, they did the same thing the audience did at that moment when the voice of Ben Kenobi says to Luke Skywalker in the climactic moment,
Use the Force, Luke. Let go, Luke.
The audience broke out into elation, into applause.
Well, you see, this thing communicates. It is in a language that is talking to young people today, and that's marvelous. People say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that the life experiences that we have on the purely physical plane will have resonances within that are those of our own innermost being and reality. And so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. That's what it's all finally about. It erases anxieties. It puts them in accord with the inevitables of their life. And they can see the positive values of what are the negative aspects of what is positive. It's whether you're going to say no to the serpent or yes to the serpent. As easy as that.
So now that we have a better understanding of the function of mythology and civilization, we can ask how it is traditionally applied to Star Wars. The Force serves the mystical function of mythology pretty well. First, we root for Luke Skywalker to defeat the evil Darth Vader.
I am your father.
Until we find out that he's actually Luke's father, and now we are as conflicted as Luke. This taught us that the world is maybe not as black and white as we thought, which plays into the sociological function of mythology. The pedagogical function is served via the Skywalker family, We learn what happens when one turns to the darkness and when one rejects the darkness.
Never. I'll never turn to the dark side.
Remember, it's about how to live a human lifetime under any circumstances. Myth helps to shape individuals to the aims and ideals of a particular social group or tribe, guiding them from birth to death through the course of a human life. These are myths that show by good and or bad example how to live a human life. It was almost necessary to show the fall of Anakin first, thereby making the eventual conquering of the shadow by Luke even more dramatic and rewarding. So these films are an important part of the psyche of most people in my age group, specifically those of us who grew up with Star Wars. And we pass that passion for these films down to our children. They've either grown up with the prequels or now the sequels. Personally, I learned that you have to face your fears even if you were scared. I learned that you need to trust in yourself. I was able to use Luke Skywalker as an example of bravery to my children. These films are truly generational now. One of the issues with the new films is directly related to legacy.
Got a plan for 7, 8, and 9, which is the end of the trilogy, and other films also.
We as a community have accepted that anything that came from George Lucas's mind is canon, which presents a problem. Now we have a hard time accepting the sequel trilogy as canon, partly because Lucas is no longer the mastermind. We really don't know how much of an influence he has had on these films. They sort of feel like Star Wars, but as time has gone by, we know they aren't the real Star Wars that we knew. And I think the foundational reason the sequel trilogy has been so divisive is its overall plot and setting. We're 30 years removed from Return of the Jedi and the fall of the Empire, yet the First Order has taken root and is essentially in power by the end of the 7th film, despite losing quite dramatically, mind you. This shows that nothing our original heroes or even our new protagonists fought for has even mattered. The entire premise of these new films are so deeply flawed from the point of conception that it would be virtually impossible to set any decent Star Wars tale inside it. The only way that the idea of a First Order makes any sense is if the First Order were the upstart rebellion and the new protagonist would be putting it down. But the socially conscious and woke Lucasfilm hive mind can't have that. The protagonists have to be rebels. Forget that they stood by watching these fascists overthrow everything they hold dear. The heroes have to be the rebels, and they hammer that home over and over and over again.
This is where we snuff out the resistance once and for all.
I'm from the resistance.
This resistance must survive.
Yeah, look, I'm not a resistance hero, but
the resistance will soon be in our grasp.
Godspeed, rebels.
rebels come.
How do we build a rebellion from this?
What are they rebelling against? Where is the Republic? Where is the Senate? Nothing that happened in the original trilogy, or even 75% of The Force Awakens, matters. The only thing that mattered in the original trilogy, according to these sequels, is Han and Leia met and had a child. Rian Johnson tried to create a compelling story out of this nonsense, but it was really doomed from back when George signed the series over to Disney. The prequels deal with the fall and the corruption of the Republic. The original trilogy deals with the rebellion to restore the Republic. These new ones deal with a rebellion against a small splinter group. It should have been about maintaining order and what to do with that power once you have it. But then that wouldn't have had caught that rebel spirit that KK loves so much.
I hope people are happy. It seems like, because in Hollywood, remember, kids, it's not important if it's of high quality, only if it makes money. So, because The Force Awakens made a lot of money, I can't be. It's not ergo. It's good.
I would argue that we have evolved as a society to a certain degree, that these kinds of stories are important to all of us. High fantasy, sci-fi escapism is good for the individual, and it connects all of us. Gives us something to talk about. It's given us highly moral characters that have to make impossible decisions for us to look to for inspiration. The Last Jedi, like any good story of its time, our modern time here, has divided us, just like we really are. It doesn't speak of a heroic act by a legend for the greater good of his ideals or his people or his family. And Luke is essentially turned into a keyboard warrior, which is of course a reflection for what a lot of modern males are.
Luke is revealed musically to us and to her, and as she offers the lightsaber we hear the Force theme. and the Force theme evolves into the Star Wars fanfare, which is the end of the film.
When you really think about Luke living in a world where everything he has fought for or loved is meaningless, then how can you blame him for turning into this shell of his former self? Of course he'd be cynical. And after the failed murder attempt of his own nephew, I'd say he was nowhere near cynical enough. Rian took it easy on Luke. As politically polarized as the U.S. is right now, we could have used a new Yoda, Luke. He could have been the spiritual master we all looked up to. He should have had a spiritual resonance with us that reflected the initial appeal of the Force, a joining of the spiritual and science back in A New Hope. But instead, we got a cynical defeatist, and who can blame him since nothing he has ever done mattered? And that's where this myth falls apart with the new sequels. Nothing matters. Nothing before it, nothing even during it. Nothing matters. Rian Johnson has taken a lot of flack, and rightfully so, for The Last Jedi. But I don't think all of it is his fault. Hear me out. Look at the nonsense he was working with. Had he cut some of the jokes out and committed to some of his ideas, we'd be having a much different conversation today. He did attempt to make something profound, but he just couldn't commit to any of it. Let's play what if for a second. So what if Luke had refused to call altogether? What if he just doesn't show up, even via hologram? What if Rey and Kylo actually team up to tear it all down? What if Finn did sacrifice himself for his newfound rebellion? What if Poe's mutiny was successful, but he got some of them killed anyway? Kylo was by far the best thing about this film, and he's just further turned into a whiny, goth, emo brat by the end. I feel deeply sorry for all of the talented people involved in the production of this. They really do not deserve the anger that is centered on the machine now known as Star Wars. These actors and actresses should be applauded for doing their best with what they had. I seriously mean that. I'm sure they poured their hearts and souls into Johnson's vision, all with the intent on entertaining us. They are not to blame. Consider that Rian Johnson wrote this film. He knows it better than anyone.
It does actually feel like this is one of those situations where we'll get exactly what we're working to get out of a location.
He has probably read his own script a few hundred times and seen the end result even more. He knew this story inside and out, and this is still what we got. And he has even gone on the record and said that he would not change anything. Through all of the table reads and pre-production and actual production and criticisms, I'm sure more people than just Mark Hamill disagreed with this direction. They were probably either let go or degraded to the point that they were in fear of their livelihood if they dared speak out publicly.
Tell me a little bit about working with Rian.
He's an asshole.
Look how the studio has handled the criticism. Name calling. In the end, Mark Hamill got very meta and became our real-life hero by being the voice of our concerns.
Is there anything that you want us to know going into The Last Jedi? Anything you want to tell the audience or the world about this one in comparison to the other ones?
It's the longest one.
What was your initial reaction when you found out you were returning just for one scene?
When I read 7, I said, I love everybody's part except mine. On this one, it was similar in the sense that I said to Rian, I'm so surprised how you see Luke.
These films now are being made by children.
Who is this guy?
It's only a movie.
How much does that play into your performance? How much are you paying attention to this new canon stuff?
You'll see.
The Jedi must end.
It's time for the Jedi to end.
Did your vision and Rian's vision, did it coincide with the way that Luke ends up in this film that you thought it would all these years later?
No.
No, not at all.
How much of Luke Skywalker did you discuss with Colin Trevorrow?
I had discussions with Colin, and I was very excited because we were on the same page in terms of where we wanted to go and how we wanted to see Luke in a way we've never seen him, even in this current version. But I don't know what went on. I don't want to know because there's no upside to that story. I mean, I like all those people, and I like Kathy, and I like Lawrence Kasdan, and all the people that were involved in that decision. But sometimes ignorance is bliss.
There'll be no more wars. We'll end world famine. Hey, baby.
Right.
Love is all you need. And that, we failed.
But
I'm happy to ruin people's childhoods.
The thing is, though, especially with a Star Wars movie, having grown up as a Star Wars fan.
I love Mark Hamill, though.
They really couldn't do anything to Mark. There's an unspoken contract in any relationship. The contract between filmmakers and their audiences are no different. With The Last Jedi, a large portion of the fans felt that the filmmakers had reneged on their part of the contract. The filmmakers' reaction to this fan criticism was essentially a breakup letter. But in Johnson's defense, he could only work with what JJ and KK had already set up, which wasn't much.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first?
The old man gave it to you.
The end result is the house always wins, because they'll either continue to make these soulless cash grabs, or they'll stop making them altogether, and either way, the fans lose.
This will be filled with spoilers, so if you haven't seen it yet, please stop watching now, although I feel less guilty about spoiling bad movies.
Wow. Let's start with the island stuff.
Okay.
So that first moment, Luke gets the lightsaber.
Right.
Tosses it over shoulder. What'd you think?
That was, can we blur this? That felt like the director just going like this to fans because we had waited so long for that moment. And this isn't us fans just kind of going crazy in our own heads. It was set up that way, that this was going to be a moment, and everything sort of that we knew about Luke and Rey and that story of them, you know, coming together, you know, was supposed to be something monumental, not something that was just played for jokes. And also, if Luke didn't want to be found, why did he leave a map to where you could find him? Think about what you want about The Force Awakens, that's fine, but stuff was set up, and a lot of it was kind of cool. They had laid the groundwork for some really cool characters and some really cool theories, and again, this was just Rian Johnson taking all of that and just burning it.
Right.
Like, burning. I wouldn't have been upset had I not had the expectation. Like, this isn't me in my own head.
Her flying through space.
Terrible. And Leia gets blown into space, but the pilot of that plane is lying on a platform above bay doors that are open, and she's not flying out. And this is literally 4 minutes apart, these two scenes. Like, and I'm not hating on this because I don't like where they were taking it. I'm just hating on it because so much of it was just poorly thought out and poorly written. And also, why not just tell Poe the plan?
Right. I know, I didn't really tell you.
Do you know how many people died? But do you know how many people died because they just felt that he didn't need to know? You can't weaponize hyperspace because it changes everything in Star Wars. You would just autopilot X-Wings, put them into hyperdrive, light speed, and just crash them into things all the time. Again, this isn't me as a crazy fan where I'm trying to think of ideas and I'm in my own head here. That was the whole point.
Right.
Of The Force Awakens, and then to just sort of blow it off that way, and then also just because you wrote just such a convoluted story that the only way to connect characters was to have Rey and Kylo Ren talk while they're light years away, and then in one scene he shows up with no shirt. It's ridiculous to me.
Yeah, that was weird.
It's ridiculous to me.
The sequel trilogy we all wanted so badly will never be. We are that cynical Luke in The Last Jedi. We want to burn it all down, because it's already a dumpster fire. Yes, this film is terrible and it's a disgrace to the Star Wars mythos, but Lucasfilm did give us something of equal importance: disillusionment. This kind of storytelling adds nothing of value to society. The heroes just win because they are supposed to. Everything is happenstance. The moral of these stories is, don't bother, it'll work out. This is a terrible end to a great and once important story. The best thing about The Last Jedi has been the reaction from the fans on YouTube, and that has truly been priceless. I do think The Last Jedi will go down as a cult classic. I think in years to come, people will watch this film either for its technical proficiency, or they'll have drinking games based on how many times the rebels say rebel or resistance. We all have a lot to learn about the concept of social media. The fans attacking the actors and actresses of these films is sad and pathetic. The way the filmmakers responded to that criticism is equally sad. It's terrible that this is the result of the new Star Wars. I don't even care what happens in Episode 9. It's already based on nonsense. Who cares? And that's the worst thing anyone can say about your film, brand, or franchise. Who cares? Not this man, baby.